Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Why Digital Transformations Fail, a closer look. Happy to have you here this morning. This is a topic that I've been looking forward to. My name's Greg Newman. I lead marketing for InflexionPoint. We are a systems integrator. You may know us as ACC formerly. We've been in this business about 40 years and have a real focus around life sciences. We're glad to be joined by our partner Quadrus, also with a life sciences focus around helping companies take advantage of AI and digital transformation. We're going to start here in just a moment. I see people are still getting settled in. We are recording today's webinar, so if you miss it or you need to leave, please know that we will be distributing a recording at the end of it. All right. I think we can get started. Today's agenda, real quick. We have an hour together, and we're going to break that up into about a third, and a third. I will introduce our panel. I'm so pleased to have them here today. And we will talk first about why digital transformations fail. We'll get into our roundtable, and then we're going to leave a good chunk of time for Q&A because we suspect there are going to be a few questions coming out of today's topic and today's talk. And we want to make sure everybody gets a chance to ask questions. So please do put your questions into the interface. We will be looking for your questions, and during the Q&A, we will pull out as many questions as we can, and we'll do our best to answer them. If we don't get to your question during today's broadcast, please know that we will do our best to answer your questions and follow up, send you some notes or information responsive to your questions after today's call. And we'll send those notes to, of course, everybody so that we can keep the information flowing and keep all this goodness moving along, even after the webinar. All right, let's jump right into it. I am very pleased today to be joined by these three experts. We have with us Tony Saldana. He's the author of Why Digital Transformations Fail. He spent 27 years at Procter & Gamble. He was the VP for IT at Shared Services, building that organization into a leader, a world-class organization. And now as a co-founder of Inixia is consulting with companies on how they can best take advantage of digital transformation. And he'll take some time to talk about his book. That'll be the first part of our webinar today. Also joined here by David Williamson, former CIO of Abzena, an expert in IT and business strategy, 2024 LifeSci Top Industry Leader, and with a focus on life sciences and how to bring digital technologies to life sciences organizations. I think he brings a terrific set of skills and experiences to today's talk. I'm pleased to have you here, David. Chris Monchinski, the CTO of InflexionPoint, our organization. Deep roots in systems integration and in operational technology, co-chair of ISA 95 Standards Committee, also the MESA Knowledge Committee chair. So somebody who really goes deep in these issues. Chris, thank you for being here as well. We will dive right into it now, everybody, and we're going to start with Tony. Tony, good morning. Again, I wanted to tell you how much I enjoyed your book. It is a great read. Really, of course, as you know, while it may be talking about digital transformation, it's really a book about business process and about people. And I'm looking forward to your talk. You can unpack. There's so much, of course. I know you could talk, I suspect, for hours about the things in this book, but we're happy to have you here for a few minutes for the next 15 or 20 minutes to talk about your book. So thank you, sir, for joining us, please.
Oh, my pleasure, Greg. And hey, good morning, good afternoon, evening to you. Yes, Tony Saldana, ex-Procter & Gamble. I always introduce myself by saying I'm really fortunate because I feel like I grew up with the IT and shared services industry. I ended up my career after 27 years with Procter & Gamble managing their global IT and shared services, which is about a $2.5 billion organization across all regions in the world. And, across 15 different assignments, 6 countries, had the opportunity to fail a lot at Procter & Gamble's digital transformation. But I suspect more importantly for you guys, we also succeeded a lot. And the work that we did ended up being the subject of about 8 different Harvard Business Review articles, books, and all of them were about the successes. No worries about that. But let me just jump into today's main course, which is why digital transformations fail. Um, you know, 70% of digital transformations fail, and I know that that number has been around a long time. Forbes actually calls it at 84%, but it really doesn't matter. And by the way, I define failure as failure to meet the original planned objectives. I know most digital transformations do deliver something, but whether they delivered something that they were set out to do is a totally different question, and that's really what we're after. Okay, um, and I'm going to jump to a story that kind of highlights my own personal journey in this particular area. So around 2015, while I was still at Procter and Gamble, and our IT and shared services was recognized in many places as being best in class. But internally, when you work inside the company, you know that that's kind of meaningless because there's always so much opportunity to do better. So we kind of set out on the journey of saying, all right, what's next? And the answer from a lot of consultants and the Big Four and stuff like that was, hey, keep doing what you guys are doing. You're fine. It's working. And we know that's never the answer, right? You really, if it's working, you really need to start to create the next. And so I set out on a personal journey to meet 100 different entities, CEOs, consultants, startups, and so on and so forth. And what I found is really, the topic of not just the book, but the work that we did at Procter and Gamble after that. What we did was we actually created the equivalent of Google X. Now, you guys may all know Google X, now X, which is the upstream innovation organization that has come out with things like the driverless car and balloon internet, and the embedded in the eye retinopathy, and so on and so forth. They work with 10 times better solutions than the current, not just 10% better. And so the question for all of us, whether we're in consumer packaged goods companies or healthcare companies, is what could disrupt the operations of our individual organizations? What could be 10 times better than the best in class? And so we put together eventually an organization that included, if you were to imagine a triangle of resources, some hand-picked director and above resources from within my organization, the vendor partners, everybody from the top 4 consulting companies, the Indian BPOs, Microsoft, a whole bunch of other people representing the vendors, and then of course the startup ecosystem. And the whole model that we set up was simply that Procter and Gamble would create the needs. So what is it that we need to disrupt? I'll give you an example. It could be, hey, can we do supply chain planning finally in real time, as opposed to what still the world does today, which is ERP, SAP, a whole bunch of other stuff. By the way, the answer to that is yes, and we were able to demonstrate that any real-time movement, slowdown of trucks, a weather incident anywhere in the world, you can replan your entire supply chain in real time. And we had 25 other examples like that. So Procter & Gamble would bring the issues. The startup ecosystem, through the top 10 venture capitalists, would connect us to startups that were truly working on 10x disruptive elements. And a lot of that, as you can imagine, was AI. But of course, we know that that's meaningless because those solutions are not scaled. And so this was the job of the big vendors. And what they had to do was enterprise harden them and make them ready to be used in large companies. My whole proposition was I was not going to pay either the big vendors or the startups, other than the pleasure of doing business with us. But when the big companies figured out how to scale these solutions, I would give them the intellectual property and the ability to sell these solutions anywhere in the world. And obviously, this was worth much more money than anything I could pay them, right? This model helped us create, not just the future of supply chain, import export, using shipping lanes anywhere in the world. The future of marketing, the future of, data management, the future of travel and expenses, and I'm happy to tell you some of those later on. But for the purposes of this particular talk, the question that we eventually had to deal with is ideas are cheap. How do you make sure that 70% of those don't fail? And as the book gets in and talks, I would summarize it in very simply two things. One is, choosing the right goal. And then the second is choosing the right methodology for digital transformation. Okay. Now, let's unpack each of those two. What is the right goal? The way we need to kind of strip off all of the buzzwords of digital transformation is to relate it to what is happening in our individual businesses. We are in the midst of a revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, and unlike the first, second, and third industrial revolutions, which came about with changes in steam engines and internal combustion engines and electricity, and the third industrial revolution, which was the internet, the fourth industrial revolution, digital technologies, and more specifically AI, is transforming all of the other technologies. So it is transforming medicine as we know it through the human genome and other biotech. It is transforming physical businesses through the Internet of Things. It is transforming social media and so on and so forth. So you have to set your goal correctly. Most businesses that were successful during the third industrial revolution will most likely fail during the fourth industrial revolution unless they transform their business model. For me, that is the only correct goal of digital transformation. Separate what I call innovation theater or digital theater from true transformation. True transformation means your job is to make sure that your company is still alive and thriving in the fourth industrial revolution era. Okay. Anything else short of that is just pure and simple theater. Okay. So that's the answer to how do you define digital transformation. It is not about technology. It is not about your little process. It is not about the magic formula. It is very simply, have you helped your business still be around and thrive in the new era? The second factor is the methodology. So let's talk a little bit about that. Most digital transformation projects are usually kind of driven by the business, and they're run by CIOs and similar organizations, shared services organization, transformation officer organizations. And what do? They use the methodology of good old project management. Obviously, these days it includes Lean, Six Sigma, and obviously Agile and so on and so forth. The fact of the matter is that those methodologies are perfectly suited for daily management and continuous improvement types of work. So when you think about daily management, upgrading your software versions, project management, or including things such as Agile are perfectly fine. Continuous improvement, your next big software implementation, it's perfectly fine. But we know that continuing to do daily management type of projects and continuous improvement is a recipe for your IT organization and your business to fail. Think about it. During industrial revolution eras, you have to do more than continuous improvement. Ask yourself, during the second industrial revolution, how much of continuous improvement on the horse carriage of the old days would have given you an internal combustion engine, right? That is simply insufficient as a strategy. During times of industrial revolutions, you need a three-part strategy. Daily management is one part, continuous improvement is a second part, And disruptive innovation is the third part. And disruptive innovation methodology is not project management methodology. It is closer to venture capitalist approaches. Venture capitalists invest in 10 companies and they don't care if they kill 9 of them as long as the 10th one is a $1 billion idea. So a part of your innovation portfolio, digital transformation portfolio, not a big part. It could be 1% of your total spend. It could be 5%. It could be 10%, no more than that, has got to be disruptive transformation ideas. And in those, it is all about, starting with the most important ones and then killing projects until you're left with the biggest ones. That's a very different methodology. And if you don't mind, Greg, moving to the next slide, that's really what my 5-stage process is, which is, when people talk about digital transformation, for the most part, they're talking about automation. They're talking about automating a given process in the company, whether it's internal operations, finance, HR, IT, so on and so forth, research and development, new product development, creation, stuff like that. For me, that is stage 1, which is foundation. Stage 2 is when one or more organizations inside the company start to figure out that they need to do not just, daily management and continuous improvement, but they start to play around with disruptive ideas. For me, that's simply stage 2 of digital transformation for the company. Stage 3 is when the board or the CEO of the company recognizes that, hey, the world is changing. We need to actually get the entire company to think about reinventing itself along digital lines. Think of what's happening in most companies. I think that awareness is growing. Even when the companies act upon it, for me, that is simply stage 3 maturity of digital transformation. Think of examples such as GE under Jeff Immelt. They wanted to be a digital company. They didn't get there, right? That's because they were stage 3. So don't fool yourself into believing that just because you have the support of the board and the CEO to be digital, you're going to make it happen, right? Stage 4 is actually when you do make it happen. You transform your business model itself. Like Netflix, who's done their new business model about 3 different times. If you're able to do it once, you are fully synchronized, or stage 4. And stage 5 is when it becomes the living DNA of the organization. You are like, any of the, famous Silicon Valley constant transformers, like the Amazons and others, who are always, every few years, figuring out a new business model. That is stage 5. So as you guys can see, when you look at digital transformation in this context, it is incredibly powerful to the business model of your company. Secondly, it requires different disciplines, different methodologies. And thirdly, it offers for all of us in IT, all of us as CIOs, the opportunity to essentially make a bigger difference inside the companies, to redefine our roles, not as order takers, but as transformers of the business model inside our companies. So with that, I'm going to pause, hand us back to Greg, because I know we've got the panel and then happy to take questions during the Q&A. Greg?
Thank you, Tony. Exactly. I appreciate it. This is a terrific overview of a really detailed and thorough process. And I think we're going to use this as a great springboard for our group discussion. Let's do that. I'm going to leave this on the screen for just a few minutes. I want to start our discussion with the group. I want to welcome David and welcome Chris into the discussion now to talk about this process, because I think what a lot of folks perhaps are reacting to is this notion, and you talked about it here a moment ago, Tony, that stage 3 may appear to be a destination, but it's only really a way station. It's only really one step, and that there's much more to it. And that may be a surprise to some folks. Chris, David, you've been through these processes a number of times. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly, I think the organization they see value from even achieving stage three. So often that's translated into we've achieved some destination. And then, as Tony was referring to, not thinking about it in a larger context and a longer time frame than a particular initiative or two. Chris?
Yeah.
You know, Tony made a couple of points that were interesting. He talked about, he mentioned project management, managing of projects, and then he talked about, really a mindset of the venture capitalist, where you're basically setting up all these projects, these trials, these ideas, and you're perfectly willing as an organization to see 9 out of 10 of them fail and to prune that tree and ultimately find the ones that really grow and then have legs and it can really benefit the business. So while you're in stage 3 and you're implementing those projects aren't just, not every project should succeed. So a lot of organizations say, okay, now we've set up our capital, we've got our buy-in. Every single initiative that we do here, we got to have the right idea out of the gate and it's got to succeed. And therefore, very often you are timid about your ultimate objectives, changing the business and really transforming the way Tony's talking about. It's like, no. The mindset has to be that stage 3, yeah, you can have your projects, but in order to be fully synchronized, you have to be reinventing yourself constantly. So these projects are just trial balloons, if you will, and some of them will succeed. And then, of course, you need to have the horsepower and the capability, the breadth to be able to push them into the organization and truly transform. But stage 3 is completely iterative, and I think that was an insight that that I took from Tony's book and Tony's review here. That it was just, wow, that's a different mindset, and that really changes a lot of people's thinking about what an organization is and how they need to act in this stage of industry.
Yeah,
and Chris, if I may, just to kind of build on firstly, I think you've got it. It is a mindset. Our job as CIOs is to actually lead the transformation, not just to take orders. The important thing that you talked about, though, is what I call the portfolio effect of projects. So the simple way to kind of think about this is your own wealth management portfolio. In that, you've got 3 types of stocks or bonds, right? 3 types of investments. You've got the safe stuff. You've got, the stuff that moves along with the S&P 500 or whatever it is. And then you've got a few high risk, high return elements in your portfolio. Why? Because decades and decades of analysis has shown that to be the best mix. The implication for us as IT managers is that if your project portfolios is all about, daily management, which is the first of the 3, and continuous improvement, and you are missing the high risk, high return part of this, then your portfolio is suboptimized. And by the way, each of these 3 requires a slightly different discipline and a methodology to be successful.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, and it brings us back to something that we all personally experienced to some extent. Exactly. So great.
One of the implications of this is that we as operators, all of us who have been tasked and responsible for operating, know that we live in the day-to-day, and we also live in an environment where we have to manage large amounts of risk. And you're right, it's a big mindset change. I'm asking the team here, how can we help organizations to embrace this new mindset? What processes can we put in place? What can we do as an organization in order to ensure that people are successful in this a process that may be unfamiliar to them?
Well, I think Tony's last comment got to the source of it, that as technology leaders, we need to lead and we need to set forth what is the roadmap, the plan on how we're going to divvy up the resources across these 3 areas. What are the timeframes and expectations that should be set and expected for?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, Tony, if I remember in your book, you talked about different change models. Organic, I believe, is one, inorganic, and the other edge, if I'm right.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that. I thought that was interesting because I think it gives some structure and some framework to people to help understand this new mode.
Yes. So I mean the ability of us as CIOs or business leaders to drive change is really driven by the context of our individual companies, and every company is different. So you really have to understand your own context. If you're a part of Twitter and it's just been taken over, and the new owner has threatened to fire 2/3 of your employees, I mean, you've got a burning platform. You've got inorganic change. You've got something that you have no choice. You're going to move really quickly. Fortunately, I hope that's not the case for most companies, and so we're not going to talk about that. Organic is the pace at which most companies move. And then, you guys know the point I was making about the portfolio effect. The fact is, that kind of change management is fine if you're at the top of your game and you need to stay there for a while and not really accelerate. But during times of industrial revolutions, such as now, you really need edge organizations. And what edge organizations are organizations like Google X, like this little organization within Procter & Gamble that I created, that are called edge organizations because they live on the edge of the company. What they are doing is they are bringing the outside in. They are bringing the most disruptive ideas so you don't get caught by surprise. Those are like the high risk, high return investments in your IT organization. And those need a change management methodology that allows them to coexist with the safe technologies. So the safe technologies could be your Epic, could be your SAPs, so on and so forth, your Oracles. The edge technologies could be your latest AI, the medical AI advisory, and so on and so forth. And so what you really need to do is then set up that change so that it is, sponsored at the top, but you create very specific communication plans so that the frozen middle part of the organization understands that this is not optional. And then the people who are going to be users, who are going to say, why are we making so many changes? This is too much, please stop. They understand the broader context. And so that's got to be part of the strategy.
So this is terrific, because I think what it does is it leads us to that next bit that I suspect are in people's minds, right? So here we have a framework, and by bringing this framework into the organization, we have a chance to set ourselves up for success with the right structure. I think the next question is, how do we proceed? What use cases might we look at? Let's talk about life sciences in particular. I think that one of the ways that we like to think about things here at InflexionPoint is big, bold ideas implemented rationally, incrementally, where possible. And so let's talk about use cases, perhaps, because in your experience, I suspect, David, for instance, you've had a chance to implement a number of initiatives. Do you like to start with a particular use case that people can get their arms around? How do you like to proceed?
Well, I think when we look at these technologies, often in life sciences, we're talking about all our paper paradigm, whether we're in the laboratories or the manufacturing of, we've been recording all this data in some sort of bound notebook, and and then I store it away in a warehouse for decades. So it's a sort of large untapped source of knowledge, and now we're looking at these transformational technologies that can not only untap that, but also start beginning untapping that with the data that we're generating electronic. The sort of pain of the paper is most of that data is generated digitally, and then we transcribe it onto paper. So how can we start mining all that digital data that we probably have stored somewhere? And I think there are several technologies like artificial intelligence that just has the capability to sift through so much so quickly and summarize that we are now and Quadris is an example of a company that's pursuing that endeavor. So trying to do that at the enterprise level is quite a lot to take on. But when we look at specific things like stability studies, predicting expiration dates, predicting potential issues, it is very capable to do in sort of a proof of concept type size.
Mm-hmm.
I know, Chris, you've also been in the middle of a few of these yourselves. If you or Tony want to add.
Well, I was going to say, when Tony was talking about the different models, for example, I think one of the things that we would traditionally, a company InflexionPoint, and having been here a long time as a systems integrator, we would plug into many of the organic developments, the implementations, where the hired muscle, if you will, and the experts to bring that change once it's roadmapped and figured out. The edge cases are the new pioneers, the new frontier. As Tony pointed out, they're on the edge of the organization, and that's a place where we can really plug in and help out as well. We need to frame our offerings, of course, around what is needed at the edge. That is nimble solutions, quick turnaround pilots, quick examples, quick use cases, and also consultation on that technology, on how it can fit into the business, to Tony's point and to yours as well. When we talk about use cases, then it's like, okay, is this use case a massive transformation where we throw away a whole monolithic type of software and change it, or is it an agentic AI or a streamlined AI solution that augments an existing solution? Takes even if you've already implemented an electronic batch record system, that data is still captured and are you taking advantage of that when you're looking at trends in your production, or asking yourself how you could possibly improve production quality, and change the way you would implement the product? All those things can be answered now with AI when it has the right structured data. And many of us already have that data in some format. Those would be examples of projects that are smaller and augment capabilities that you already have in your environment. So there's different ways to adopt this technology. Each of them lead to ultimately to some sort of transformation. And the question is how big and bold you want to be, and how you want to implement that.
Chris, you bring up a really good point, and you remind me of something we were talking about the other day, which is that, of course, all of these projects implicate people and process and technology, right? And so, to what extent should we be looking at our process before we even look at technology? Because technology gives us the opportunity, perhaps, to reinvent that process, does it not?
100%. I mean, if I just to chime in, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I often start with, thinking about digital transformation. I also like to remind people that the fundamentals still apply, no matter what the technology is that we're implementing today and the technology du jour. The shiny new toy in the room. The reality is, what is it doing to improve the business? So understanding your business processes, and how your business acts and reacts to all the different levers and forces that are interacting with it in the world are key to understanding where the opportunities are. And then the technologies are enablers. And the technologies, what is really truly transformational about the technology today is that the compute power we have is so great now that we can do things with that compute power that we were never able to do before, and we were only able to imagine. Digital twins are a great example of that. Being able to run processes in parallel and truly have first principle physical models,
Right.
truly understand reactions, truly understand. Tony mentioned supply chain modeling and supply chain balance. There's a lot of complexity and variables that go into that. We have compute power to be able to do that now. So the business needs have always been there. The technology are the tools now that enabled us to do new, to embark on new paradigms.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Greg, on the people, process, and technology, the interesting thing is how the technology, i.e. digital, and people are coming together like never before. So just from my own example, literally within the past 3 days, I have come across two companies. One is Moderna, the vaccine manufacturer, and then there's another one, Systematic, in Denmark, who actually have combined their CIO and Chief Human Resource Officer roles into one.
Okay.
Think about it. Why
That's
wouldn't you
interesting.
do that?
Yeah.
Why would you not do that? Because your future workforce is a combination of humans and bots. And so, aren't you really getting prepared? To Chris's point, technology has become cheap, where you could get, $100 bots to do the work of a fully paid knowledge worker in many cases, for very narrow use cases. So the fact there is that what becomes most important, and really this would be my input and advice to our listeners here, is what you have is your understanding of your own business, which no external party or bot can disrupt. You really have to start with there. And then you've got to bring in the right kind of experts and, systems integrators and others to find the right kind of solutions. The solutions are all there, and you don't really need to go hunting for them. What you need to do is understand what are the biggest size of prize outages in your business and in your process. And that's really where you can add a lot of value today.
Yeah, that makes good sense. And it's interesting how you weave that together so that the focus remains on the people and the process. As you say, the technology's there. We know that. And it's never really about that so much. We are getting near the time when we'd like to take some Q&A. Sorry, things have gone a little bit long, but we've had a fun discussion. One of the questions that came up actually is a question that we put up on the screen here because we were talking about this earlier, which is people are curious for real world examples, right? Where have you seen things go well or perhaps even poorly, which, we learn a lot from failure. We all know that. And so any stories you guys want to share? Maybe some brief stories around things that you think will be impactful and meaningful to our audience?
I can get started. I mean, in the book, Why Digital Transformations Fail, I try in each of the chapters to kind of provide a story. And usually it's either a story of success or a story of failures. And it's got, stories all the way from, history, the failed digital transformation effects of the McDonald's company many years ago when they tried to roll out a digital technology to all of their retail stores, and it was a massive write-off. Or the Denver airport, and of course, some of our own government's attempts at originally, implementing the Affordable Care Act, and then going back and correcting it and making it a huge success. And so there's lots and lots of examples in there, but also from within my own experience. So some of the experiences of, there's one very quick one that I want to share. How Adobe and Google and others do travel and expenses. They have no travel and expense reports. They don't have back office where people are actually matching expenses with, scanned stuff. They're using data. So if you want to do a trip from, New York to California, you go into the system and the system has, all of the data on your company's policies and, all of the costs of hotels and stuff like that, and spits out a number that says, hey, Greg, for your 3-day trip, your budget is $4,000 or whatever it is. At that point in time, as long as Greg is using the corporate credit card for all transactions, from which all of the data is matched for compliance. It's like, Greg, why did you have 3 lunches on that particular day? That kind of stuff. It automatically generates the travel and expense report. So you have no back office, you have no need for receipts, you have all of the regulatory compliance, and best of all, not only do you save 15 to 25% of your company's travel and expense budget by empowering people, but the people are actually happier that you gave them the control.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of examples that I could share.
So obviously that's outside manufacturing operations, but I think it's impactful to everybody on this call. We've all experienced what you just talked about, Tony, right? The travel. And so we can appreciate what a great reimagining of a process, right? And I suspect that these companies were thoughtful in their implementation, and they started by asking a key question, which is, what end do we want to achieve? Let's imagine that first, right? And see if we can then build a project around that. Do you find this to be a useful construct, or is it perhaps a bit too ambitious to say start with the end in mind? Because maybe it's hard for people to imagine an end and truly imagine something different. Chris, you've been in this. You work.
Well, I mean, in life sciences, of course, and we talked about this a little bit. We touched on it, throughout this conversation. we talked about the business needs being paramount, and that then the technology being subordinate and an enabler. In the life sciences, more than even just the business needs, you think about your ultimate, function in the industry, which is to help patients, is to have successful patient outcomes, right? So that of course is a tenet within most and any life science organization, part of their essential mindset that they drive people to understand. And then that drives everything else. So for example, if it's reducing the time between production and patient delivery, that becomes then a North Star, right? And then the question is, well, how do I then enable that? And I just start to rip apart and tear down all the business processes, all the different things that involve the time between production and patient delivery. This is particularly true now in our world of cell and gene therapy and patient of one type, algorithms, where we're expected to tailor medicines, to individuals, but in doing so, there are lots of time constraints now. There's lots of geographic constraints getting medicines to an individual at their location, but manufacturing it in a different location. Achieving that and mastering that in a cost-effective way, and also maintaining that North Star of being able to maximize the patient's outcome, that is a successful patient outcome. Those things are incredibly important, and that's where you start, right? And then that again, then it drives the mindset of, to Tony's point, of rethinking the way expenses are done, ripping up the old processes and changing the way you think about how you're going to implement solutions, changing the way you're doing business, and then, oh, by the way, what technologies can support that and enable that in a cost-effective manner, enable that in a regulated environment where we're tracking things and have full audit trail and compliance. Those things are important to life sciences. The technology are the enablers.
The specificity with which you just spoke, I think, is an important thing to acknowledge, right? A big North Star goal then needs to be translated into specific goals, objectives, and strategies. And it's that specificity that brings power, right? It's not enough just to say we want to broadly do this. It's here's our path. David, you've experienced this firsthand. How do you tend to break these things up so that you have these specific objectives and specific strategies?
Yeah, so Chris outlays, I think, the best case where we have a corporate global level goal objective that we're going to drive to. So you're addressing the different stages that Tony brought up. We're not just talking about what are we going to do in supply chain or what are we going to do in manufacturing. We're talking about the whole corporation and everybody involved in it. Yeah. Those are the most powerful, and it gives us a destination that we can all align to. I think often with projects and initiatives, we don't know when we get there, or we don't have a way to measure our progress on how to get there. So having that is very, very valuable. And then, as Chris and you were just describing, breaking that down into what is my function's role in achieving this, what is my partner's function's role, etc. And that addresses one of the largest hurdles, which is the people and the change management. Why are you going to make my day-to-day life different and fundamentally different if we're doing a transformation correctly?
It's true, and of course, getting buy-in, getting everybody to share the vision and understand where we're trying to head and their role in it can be difficult if things are happening off to the side and people are simply being given instructions. I find, and tell me if this is true amongst you, that workshopping and other type of collective engagements can play a huge role in not only surfacing great ideas, right, but getting everybody to buy in to the project, to the initiative. Is a workshop a format that you've used successfully before? What other formats and what other methods do you think help with that?
Well, absolutely. It's a great way to proceed, and getting those people who are in the middle of those business processes, who really understand what is working and what's not working, and getting their inputs, ideas, and such, it can be extremely powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're working with them, go ahead, Tom.
Sorry.
No,
I think design thinking as a methodology, which uses a lot of workshopping type of techniques, is a really, really good methodology to kind of step back and say, what are we trying to do? And then, of course, you can tag along with design thinking solutions like lean startup, which will then figure out, okay, what's the actual product that you're trying to deliver. And then, of course, you can use after that Agile to deliver that particular product in a much better, cheaper, faster manner.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. This is good. Chris, you had a comment to make. I want to make sure we.
No, I was going to say, we think, and again, coming from my systems integration roots, and where we work in this space, you think about a manufacturing site, and you think about projects, but really you have to start thinking about this as a cultural shift. So workshopping and really starting out with a much broader group really drives home the importance of the inclusivity of these transformation projects. We're not just implementing a technology, we're implementing basically a change in culture, a change in idea. So you have to bring in many different folks and build the cross-functional team, and that team needs to understand that they have joint ownership of the outcome of this transformation from not just the initial workshops but all the way through to the final delivery, so that when a year has gone by and you now implemented these projects, you have a true way of tracing back ROI, you have a buy-in, and of course you have built momentum to continue that journey in the organization.
We have reached the end of an hour. It has gone by quickly for me. I hope everybody here has enjoyed it. I've certainly enjoyed the discussion with you three gentlemen. I want to thank you very much for being here with us. Everybody on the call, please understand we can't get to everybody's question. Like I said earlier, we will do our best to answer and respond. So please do look for some emails from us. We'll have a recording of this. And if you have questions, please follow up with us. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks. It's been fun.
Enjoyed it.